we are making clarified butter. Now, clarified butter is very similar to regular butter, except the liquid, the water, and the milk proteins have been removed. And what this means is, for folks that are lactose intolerant, you can often ingest and use clarified butter in your cooking and you're totally fine. You get a really high smoke point. So if you want to add butter to a pan when you're cooking, to add all that really delicious buttery flavor, but often the pan gets too hot and it gets really smoky, clarified butter helps solve that problem because clarified butter has a much higher smoke point, meaning it can get really hot before it gets smoky. Also, making your own clarified butter will save you a ton of money. By the end of this call, you're going to know how to make your own clarified butter. You're going to know how to save a ton of money on making that clarified butter, and you'll have that super flavorful high smoke point cooking medium, oil, butter, whatever you want to call it. And the reason that's important is because most high smoke point cooking mediums, oils, don't actually have much flavor. Avocado oil is a really great oil for cooking at high temperatures, but it doesn't really carry much flavor. It's a pretty bland oil. Now, if you want to add a ton of flavor, clarified butter will be your friend. I'm your host tonight. I'm Tim Walsh, and I teach people how to become incredible chefs and bakers. Without further ado, I want to get started because this is just so damn fast. We might as well give you a quick win and move on. So tonight, the equipment list is super easy. We need a stock pot, fill it about halfway with water, bring it up to a simmer before you get everything else ready. You need a heavy-duty Ziploc bag. One of these guys, make sure there's no holes in it, make sure the top seals up well. And you need butter. That's the only ingredient that you need, butter. You want unsalted butter. You don't want salted butter. Get the salt out of there. Stop buying salted butter. Unsalted butter, anywhere from 1 to 2 pounds. I'm going to do 2 pounds tonight, and I typically buy my butter in European style bricks. So that's a chunk of butter this big. It's the same thing as 2 sticks of butter. So 2 pounds of European style butter is 4 bricks, 4 of those big bricks. If you're using standard sticks of butter, that's going to be 8 sticks of butter. So if those are frozen, the process takes a little bit longer, but it's still the same exact process, and we'll go over that in just a minute. First off, make sure you're watered up to a simmer. Then we're going to throw our butter into the bag. This is it. It's a bag and it's butter. I already unwrapped the butter so we can get it in there nice and quick. Try to set it in such a way where you create as much surface area as possible so that it just melts a little bit quicker. Squeeze as much air out as you can. Seal it up. Just really get as much air out as you possibly can. This is it. So we're going to place this in our simmering water for about 15 minutes. If this is fridge temperature butter, you can also use room temperature butter. If it's frozen, it's going to be closer to 23 minutes before this is ready. So let's do that right now. A little over half full of water. I already brought it up to what's basically a boil right now. It's between a boil and a simmer. Partially because the lid's still on, so that's trapping some heat. Literally all we do is we gently place our baggie into the water and we let it sit there. Make sure that the heat's on. It should be pretty low. This is the lowest setting right there. I'm only about one tick on my stove above that. You could maybe do 2, but don't go above that because all we're trying to do is melt the butter. We don't want to brown the butter. And that brings me to the important differences. And before I jump into that, setting a timer just to make sure I don't lose track of time. The important differences between butter, clarified butter, and ghee. Now, butter, by definition, needs to have a minimum of 80% fat in it. If it's anything less than that, at least in the United States, they cannot legally call it butter. It's got to be called something else. Shortening is one that's used often. Clarified butter is 99 to 100% fat. The water and the protein has been removed. Ghee is also 99 to 100% fat. And the difference between ghee and clarified butter is that ghee was cooked longer with the milk solids still present, and that's important. With the milk solids still present, is that the milk solids start to brown and impart a nutty flavor. Then the milk solids are filtered out. The process we're doing tonight will make clarified butter. It will not make ghee though. It's a slightly different process for ghee because you need to impart enough heat to brown those proteins. But the process we're doing tonight will guarantee that you have a very buttery flavor and it will be nutty and rich. So that's what we're making tonight, our clarified butter. And let me break down like how much of these ingredients fall into butter for you. I brought my little whiteboard out tonight. So if we imagine butter as the brick we typically see, right? Go like this, make a little 3D image. About 80% of this, let's assume that's 80%, is going to be fat. 80% of our stick of butter. Then about 17% is going to be water. And the last 3%, sometimes it's 2%, and this is a little bit higher. Last 3% here, this is your milk proteins. This last bit here, it's the smallest portion of the butter. I can fill in our water a little bit. This is the breakdown of a standard stick of butter. 80% fat, 17% water, 3% milk proteins. Anything less than 80% fat, like I mentioned earlier, they cannot legally call it butter. So what the difference is between butter and clarified butter and ghee is if we were to draw this shape again, like this, make sure we got that sweet 3D image, right? Basically, all that's left is this one little tiny shred of the world's tiniest amount of the protein. It's very negligible, and just the tiniest amount of water. And the amount that's left of each, it's the tiniest sliver. Really, it's 99%. It can't even be 100% fat. That's the difference. Our butter turns into clarified butter when it becomes, switching all of these colors for you, when it becomes 99 to 100% fat. Now, it's important for a couple of reasons. I mentioned earlier that the smoke point is higher. The reason the smoke point is higher is because it's this 3% of proteins that burns in the pan and causes it to create a ton of smoke and give you kind of a charred flavor sometimes, and what you really want is a good buttery flavor. Because that milk protein is a combination of also lactose, which is a sugar, so it's not just protein, it's also sugars. This is what causes folks to not be able to digest butter well, especially if they're lactose intolerant. Now, if you heat it up and allow these things to separate and remove the proteins, the sugars, and the water, you have something that's almost pure fat, and folks who are lactose intolerant can handle that just fine. Basically, everyone reacts poorly to milk proteins, so you just basically have a healthier product to use in your cooking that still has the beautiful flavor that you want from butter. And then ghee is the same thing as this. It's the same thing, it's just in the transformation process here. Instead of using a plastic baggie like we've got here, what you use is you just take a small saucepan or stock pot and you put just butter inside. That's it, only butter, on very low heat. You slowly bring it up to temp. You're gonna get some white solids forming on the top, on the surface. Make sure no one's doing the call. Some white solids forming on the surface. Those are eventually going to sink to the bottom and start browning. And that browning adds a nutty flavor to your, what will be ghee. All you do then is you use a fine mesh strainer and some cheesecloth, and you pour all the butter out through that strainer, through the cheesecloth, so it catches those milk solids, and all you're left with is the ghee. The water is evaporated during the heating process. So that's how the water is removed. In that instance, for us, the water is removed because after we heat up the butter, it actually separates into these three distinct layers. we have a water layer on the bottom, a fat layer on top, and then right on top of that, we have this protein layer that you can literally scrape or rinse off. So you get this really clean, really pure version of your clarified butter. I mentioned price. I mentioned it a couple times. And price is really important because, let me break this down for you. A really nice stick of European butter will be anywhere from $3 to $4. Meaning, I mean, it could, if stock is low, it could go all the way up to $5. So let's say $3 to $5 for really nice European style butter, like what I'm using here tonight. That means if we make 2 pounds of clarified butter, or rather we use 2 pounds of butter to make clarified butter, that costs us about $12 to $15 worth of ingredients. That's not too bad. We're still getting a lot out of this. We're not really wasting anything. A little bit of water, a little bit of protein solids we don't want anyway. Now, if I bought 1 regular stick's worth of clarified butter, or rather, well, we'll try to keep the metrics the same. If I was using a European bar of butter, so it's 2 sticks of butter, 8 ounces. If I bought 8 ounces of clarified butter at the grocery store, basically the equivalent of this, what that typically costs you is between $14 and $15. Which means our $12 to $15 worth of butter is magically turned into about $60 worth of clarified butter, and all we did was melt it. We're then going to cool it a little bit and separate the layers. But if you bought this directly at the store, a little jar, 8 ounces, $14 to $15, easy. Often things are even labeled ghee when all it is clarified butter, because ghee needs to have a nutty flavor. Otherwise it's not ghee, it's just clarified butter. So save yourself the extra $10-ish per 8 ounces and just buy the really good butter and then turn it into clarified butter. Seriously, $15 compared to $60. That's what this is worth when you're done. $60 versus, and this is on the high end if we call that 15. That is pretty nice little return on your efforts, if you ask me. The next steps, after everything melts in your stock pot, the next thing you're going to want to do is take a big bowl, big heat-proof bowl, fill it with ice, and then set your bag into that bowl of ice at an angle. So one of the tips, I'll show you. So one of the tips is pointed down. And you can even see on here, we're seeing separation already. We've got this white stuff down here, our fats up here, and we've got our proteins up here. So we've got some liquid proteins and water down here. This is all fat, and this is going to be the solid white proteins. But you want to set it in your bowl so that the tip is down here, so it's easier to remove later, and you'll see why. Okay, here is the clarified butter I prepped for you last night. You can see down at the bottom here, now you can see it. We got this liquidy chunk. We've got a really solid chunk up here, and then there's a little bit of white stuff at the top. So all you do, point your tip down, get some kitchen shears, get the bottom off, let that drain out. That's all that liquid protein and water we don't want from our butter solids. Shake it out a little bit. Open up your baggie. On top. You won't be able to reuse your baggie for this, which is totally fine. On top is where we've got some of those proteins. You can see they just scrape right off. So you can scrape this off with your finger. You can use a knife. Another really easy thing you can do, run this under cold water in the sink and then pat it dry. Make sure you use cold water, otherwise you're melting your butter fat, your clarified butter here. Most of it comes right off. I'm going to run this under the sink real quick and show you what it looks like after it's been rinsed. So here is the clarified butter with all of the proteins rinsed off. You do want to just pat it dry real quick for any of that moisture that just got on there when you rinsed it. And after that, you could chop this up into little blocks. You could remelt it into shapes that you prefer to use, because this is kind of an awkward shape right now. Save time, I'm just going to throw this into another baggie. I know that I have this beautiful clarified butter to use anytime I like. Maybe later I'll chop it up into little blocks and use it for some cooking or put it into some pre-measured vessels. But for now, this is perfect. You can store this now at room temperature for months. If this is in an airtight container, especially good is if you melt this down and throw it in, say, a glass jar with a nice tight lid. This will last literally months at room temperature without going rancid because we remove those milk proteins. If you throw it in the fridge, this will last 1 whole year fresh in your fridge. Okay, and another tip, if you don't have any ice, say your ice maker's on the fritz, or you need to go out and buy some and you forgot, or you only use ice cube trays and they're not ready, that's not a problem either. You can just use cool water and still place this in the fridge. Ice will work a little bit faster. Cool water will also work. You'll just want to rest a little bit longer. You wait until it's solid. So the easiest thing to do is fill this up, put your baggie in, and then just leave it in the fridge overnight, and you've got your clarified butter in the morning. Areas where you might want to use clarified butter. Really great question, right? You can use it when you're cooking your eggs. You can use it when you're making pancakes. You can use it basically anywhere you would use butter for cooking. You can use your clarified butter. One place where it works remarkably well is if you have to bake anything at a really high temperature in the oven. So one example is a very popular recipe called the Dutch baby. It's kind of like a really thin pancake with some fruit sprinkled on top, but you line the inside of the pan, or you brush the inside of the pan with some clarified butter before it gets really hot. And because the clarified butter can handle all that heat, it doesn't make your Dutch baby taste a little bit burnt, and it doesn't get all smoky. Another area is if you're cooking steaks and you want your steak to be just phenomenal. Right before your steak is done, throw a little bit of clarified butter in the pan and just angle the pan so the clarified butter melts and pools at the corner, and use a spoon and spoon the butter on top of your steak. You're basically basting your steak in clarified butter, but even if the pan's super hot, it's not going to be much of a problem because you're using clarified butter, so it's much less likely to get so hot that it burns on you. There's just a couple quick places you can use clarified butter. It's also really good if you do bulletproof. You can use clarified butter, and then you don't have to worry about the milk proteins in it. Keto folks also tend to use clarified butter, but they spend an arm and a leg buying it at the store at $14 to $15 a jar. So instead, buy the really good butter you know you can trust from a brand that you like, and make your own clarified butter. Here is our clarified butter. We can see the layers separated in this. So this is that liquid that we saw drain out when we snipped the bottom. This is all the fat. This is the really good stuff. That's called liquid gold right there. And these are all the solid proteins on top that you scrape off or rinse off afterwards. Here we go. Just like this. Boom. And we make a little nesting hole for it. Watch out, your bag will be hot, so don't get your fingers too close to it. And just give it room to rest on there. Throw this in the fridge, leave it overnight until that liquid fat is solid. Trim the tip off the bottom like you saw before, and then rinse your proteins off the top. There you go. That is clarified butter. It is super easy to make at home. You will save a ton of money over buying it from the store.